Hey everyone, welcome. It's now embargo time for an announcement that Intel has made today. As you can probably see from the thumbnail, I hope that showed up okay. Intel has officially revealed pricing on its Arc A770, A750 cards. We had a tease of pricing earlier this week from Pat Gelsinger during his Intel Innovation keynote, where he said the A770 would start at $329 on October 12th. Well, there were some questions. Was that $329 for the 16 gig card? Was it $329 for the 8 gig card? How much would the 16 gig card cost? How much would the A750 cost? We still want to know how much the A580 will cost as well and when that's coming out, but we don't have that information just yet, and so we'll get back to that as soon as we're able. Anyway, I will kick around here for a little bit as we wait for people to pile in, and then we'll get going with the show. It's been one of those weeks, those afternoons, those days. I've had a lot of stuff going on, just like Paul on the CPU side. We were on earlier talking all about Raptor Lake and Zen 4 and the Zen 4 performance, and you can go and check that out in our video feed. We're back again later in the day because I thought this one warranted a quick overview. We've got the full slide deck from Intel. I'm actually going to go ahead and run through that with you because some of you don't always see that, and I'll give you the Jared version of the commentary that Intel provided on the slides because, you know, obviously I see things differently than Intel sometimes. No PR from me. We're just going to go straight to the good stuff. Actually, let's go to this view. All right. We've seen this before, I think. So we've got 5 different Arc desktop GPUs. A380 was already launched, started in China, then of course it leaked to the other places, and eventually released in the US at, I'm trying to remember now, was that in August or was it in early September? I think it might have been August that it finally showed up at Newegg for $139. It's been sold out routinely since arriving, which doesn't really surprise because even though it's not a super fast graphics card, it does have good video codecs, it does have 6 gig of RAM, and, you know, it's the first Intel card. I wonder how many reviewers are trying to buy it off of Newegg. But, alright, so we've got that out of the way. Arc 5 A580. That one is still the unlaunched card. And we don't have a date on it yet. We don't have a price, but actually, there were rumors that it was going to be I said closer. It was going to be a lot less than the Arc 7 were the earlier rumors because people thought, they'll cut it down to like a 128-bit or maybe 192-bit memory interface. You know, give it 6 gigabytes or 12 gigabytes of RAM, make some other changes, drop the power budget and all that. But it turns out it's going to have the full 256-bit memory interface. It will also use GDDR6 16 gigabits per second memory, but it will drop clock speed and have fewer execution units, fewer Xe cores than the Arc 7 cards, and it will only use 175 watts. So that's pretty cool. Then we have the 750, the 770 cards. Those are all launching on October 12th. Right now, we have limited information on which cards will be available in terms of partner cards. We have seen pictures that suggest at least ASRock will be making a couple of Arc GPUs or Arc graphics cards, and Gunner, who was one of the few companies making Arc A380 GPUs, will also be making Arc 700 series graphics cards. And so we've seen A380 from both of those companies. That's not too surprising. Are there going to be more companies? You know, ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte. Hey, maybe EVGA will get back into the graphics card business. No, I don't think EVGA is coming back to make Arc cards. But will there be others that make Arc? That remains an unknown. So things to note here. Most of the specs, you know, pretty straightforward. Clock speeds go up a little as you move to the higher end models. The 16 gig Arc A770, which Intel will be selling under its limited edition brand. That's LE, kind of like, you know, an Odyssey LE or a Honda LE. I drive an Odyssey, sorry. Honda or Toyota LE. That's what we're talking about. LE doesn't mean it's going to be limited production, but you'll notice that the memory speed does get a boost. I believe that's 17.5 gigabits per second. I might have done the math wrong there. But so you've got 16 gigabits per second on the 580, the 750, and the 8 gigabyte 770, but it will be faster memory on the 16 gigabyte version. All right, let's move on. Here's the full specs. Oh, there it is, 17.5 gigabits. Nothing really too noteworthy here. We've all seen this before, or at least I've seen it for a while now. So you can see all the nominal things here. These are Intel's models. So the 750 does not have the RGB lighting, whereas the 770 does. The only other real difference besides memory capacity is that you get 28 Xe cores instead of 32, very slightly slower clock of 2.05 gigahertz compared to 2.1 gigahertz. Again, slightly slower memory as well, but they're both still 225 watt cards, which is a little interesting. I haven't tested them yet. I don't know if that's the maximum or if it's just like, hey, that's what they're putting on the spec sheet, and when we actually test them, it might use less power. I mean, it would make sense for it to use less power if it has slower memory, fewer execution cores, and a slightly lower clock speed. But at the same time, binning sometimes means that the cards sold as an A750 may not be like the perfect ideal chips, and so sometimes that means that they don't run at the desired voltages and power levels, and so, you know, it uses, like I've seen that before where you've got, I'm trying to think of a good example. Off the top of my head, I want to say like I've seen 3080 cards where they, you know, use more power even though they're not really clocked higher, partly because they're just not, you know, binned as nicely. That's probably, a 3080 is probably not the main one. I'm trying to think. There was an AMD card that I saw that. All right. AV1 support, encoding and decoding, same with H.265, which is called HEVC, H.264, VP9 as well. That's all the same as what's on the 380, but you're just getting, you know, a much beefier GPU to go along with it. I mean, the A770 is basically 4 times the hardware that you find in the A380, except that it doesn't have 4 times as much memory. It has 2.66 times more memory. The memory isn't clocked twice as fast, stuff like that, but it does deliver a lot more potential performance. Here's the building block of your Arc GPUs. The Xe core has 16 256-bit vector engines. Those would be nominally called GPU cores or GPU shaders. And then it also has these 1024-bit matrix engines, which are what will be used for XeSS if you're running XeSS on an Arc GPU. They can also be used for deep learning and other applications. So we'll see what they're put to use doing besides XeSS in the future. Pat Gelsinger talked about this slide. They showed it in the keynote at Intel Innovation, talking about how GPU prices have been going up. They show $418 for the RTX 3060. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Let's see. It says average selling. Oh, so that's kind of an interesting one. Average selling price calculated for RTX 3060 and RTX 3060 Ti on September 22nd from Newegg. Well, that's weird, because the 3060, I can tell you right now, if you go to Newegg, I looked earlier today and there is I'm trying to remember, I think it's MSI. It was either MSI or I don't think it was EVJ. Probably MSI. There was an RTX 3060 that was $369, and then there's a special discount code right now for, I don't know what event Newegg is doing. But there's a discount code where you get 15% off orders of $350 or more. I'm like, wow. So if you order that quickly and you get the Newegg 15% discount, that means you could get a 3060 for as little as $314. Kind of cuts into the exciting Arc pricing story. How long that pricing will be available? Will we see prices fall? That's all a lot more difficult to say. The 3060 Ti, meanwhile, I mean, like, if you were talking about July or August, both of those cards were much more expensive than they are today. So, you know, again, looking at Newegg, for example, because that's where Intel says it took its data from. And it's saying average price across a bunch of models, maybe. So right now, brand new cards, not used, the RTX 3060 Ti starts at $449, and the RTX 3060 starts at $369. So there's an MSI Ventus at $369, Gigabyte at $379, Asus Dual at $379. You know, you're not getting the super high-end, like Asus Strix cards for $370, but you are getting a lot of models that cost under $400 now, which does change the pricing story that Intel is telling. You know, prices continue to fall. We've said in other shows, we expect a glut of used graphics cards very shortly because GPU mining is all but dead. You know, it's not super profitable. So here we are, the A770, their Halo card. The limited edition comes with 16 gigabytes and all the RGB lighting, and it will start at $349. So that's actually, I mean, for my sake, even if it doesn't help performance that much in a lot of cases, $20 extra for 16 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 8 gigabytes is like, that's a no-brainer. You know, that's a 10% increase, less than a 10% increase, and that will potentially help performance in certain cases by 10 to 20%. You know, if you run out of VRAM with 8 gigabytes, it will be problematic. So it enables you to use higher quality textures, higher quality shadows, and it just ensures that you're less likely to hit those memory bottlenecks. We've seen that on cards like the 2070, 2060 Super, all of those 20 series, also on the 3070, 3060 Ti, 3070 Ti. Those all have 8 gigabytes. It's a concern, especially when you're paying $500 and more for some of those cards. You know, at $329, I think 8 gigabytes is still fine, but it's been around since 2016 as a standard for mid-range cards. So, you know, we don't want to see that as a high-end option anymore. Then this is the big one, Arc A750, starting at $289. So undercutting NVIDIA by a fair amount on, assuming they deliver roughly equivalent performance to 3060, which is what Intel is claiming. We'll get to that shortly. You know, that's going to be quite interesting. I'm going to leave it on this slide for a minute. I'm trying to keep this show relatively short because I've got to get off to an event, but, you know, we've got some viewer comments here. Buddy, I'm excited for the cards and the 13900. I'm excited too. Maybe a little less excited about the cards than I am for 13900, but I'm really excited to have Intel entering the dedicated GPU market. Like, this is a big deal. We've had this two-pony race for 2 decades, more or less. And, you know, AMD and NVIDIA, ATI and NVIDIA have been going head-to-head for all of that time. NVIDIA has the lion's share of the market. Intel has been content making integrated graphics for all of those years, and they were slow and often weak and bad and driver problems and all these things. So, yes, I'm excited to see both their cards and their new processors, their Raptor Lake CPUs. I think pairing Arc with a 13900K would probably be a bit weird. But if you're looking at like an i5 13400, which I think are supposed to cost around $200, okay, those won't actually be out until next year. So I guess the 13600K is what will launch this year. Those are closer to probably $300 by the time you add a heatsink. But still, $300 CPU, $300 GPU, that's not a bad option, as long as you don't need a new motherboard and all the other stuff. And then John Johnson says, do I think Intel will take the lead this year? Absolutely. Are we talking CPUs or GPUs? Because if the question is CPUs, there's a very real chance it takes the lead with Raptor Lake. If we're talking GPUs, no. Lead, no, not even close, because Intel itself is going after 3060 levels of performance, and we've got the RTX 4090 launching. Actually, it's supposed to, I think, launch on the same October 12th date. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Intel is launching mid-range cards, value-oriented cards, for $290 to $350 on the same day that NVIDIA's like, hey, check out our new $1,600 and above GPU. So in the mid-range segment, they could gain a lot of market share pretty quickly, and Intel can do volumes. You know, even though they're using TSMC to manufacture this, Intel knows about how to do volumes. So we'll see how availability turns out in the next couple of weeks. This is their big caveats on the performance per dollar: 42% better, 53% better. The important thing is, you know, they're saying slightly better than 3060 performance while costing less. So yeah, that boosts your performance per dollar a lot. Got to factor in the rest of the system too. 3060 should not cost $418 now. Certainly the $418 models would be nicer than the $360 models, and also nicer than the $300 or the $290 Arc, I would suspect. So if you like RGB, what does an RGB Arc A750 end up costing? I don't know. We'll find out in a couple weeks. Performance. These are Intel's benchmarks. You know, disclaimers aside, all tested at 1440p in high settings. Oh, this is performance per dollar. Where's the... I thought I had to just... Oh, here we go. Performance. Sorry, I had to flip through the slides. First, we've got performance. This is the 3060 and the 750 going head-to-head. Tested across, if you count, that's 67 games. And you can see there's a lot where the A750 comes out ahead. There's some where it trails. A lot of the trailing is over in the DirectX 11 space. And that's where Intel has said, hey, our drivers were not up to snuff. They're still working on it. It's getting better. Still, like, I think if you were to take an average of all of the games out there that were tested, you know, I think the A750 would come out a bit ahead. So that's good. Slide 10 is performance per dollar. We're now taking price into account, and that's where that $418 for the 3060 becomes questionable, and of course that skews everything upwards. So things like, hey, look, if you're playing Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition on an Arc, you can get up to twice the performance per dollar. We don't have all their testing details. I don't really think they did anything super screwy, but you know, performance per dollar does change the metric and get a little messy. 1080p, again, performance per dollar, you know, it changes a bit because you probably get a little higher frame rates at 1080p Ultra than 1440p high. Then this is the A770, 8GB versus the 3060. Here you can see that they're claiming better performance per dollar in every game except for League of Legends, which is a very high FPS, you know, what do you call that, MOBA. I don't know, like maybe it's that Intel reaches a maximum frame rate of 200 frames per second, whereas NVIDIA goes to 250 or something. Probably not that critical, but again, because we're talking price per dollar or performance per dollar, that does have the potential to skew the charts radically, especially if you use a price that's potentially $50 higher. 1080p, basically the same story. We'll move on from there. Okay, powerful ray tracing hardware. We have talked about this a bit. You get one thread sorting unit, which this is interesting because NVIDIA has their new shader execution reordering feature in Ada Lovelace, SER. SER requires the developers to actually go and tag assets to say, hey, this is the type of shader that's running on it, so that the GPU can better sort them and send them to the appropriate streaming multiprocessors and thus boost performance. Intel's thread sorting unit is trying to do that automatically, so it might not get as big of a benefit as SER, but it happens in all games. So that's kind of important. There's nothing that the developer needs to do to take advantage of the thread sorting unit. They also have one ray tracing unit per Xe core with 2 ray traversal pipelines. It can do 12 ray box intersections per cycle and 1 triangle intersection per cycle, and it has a dedicated BVH cache. NVIDIA has never quite revealed how many box intersections it can do on its various architectures. I suspect that Turing is probably less than 12, but it could do 1 ray triangle intersection per cycle per RT core. Ampere potentially doubled the triangle intersection rate. I don't know that it really changed the box intersection rate, but they added some other hardware. Ada doubles the ray triangle rate again, I think. Like Ada will have a lot of ray tracing performance. So keep that in mind. We'll see what happens when we get an RTX 4060. All right, ray tracing performance. This is also important. AMD has really avoided doing a lot of ray tracing comparisons, often using ray tracing games that were like built for AMD's hardware that kind of offer garbage ray tracing, where it's like, hey, Dirt 5 has ray trace shadows that almost don't look any different than the non-ray traced shadows. And in that, AMD's RX 6000 series can do okay, right? Well, Intel is going right after the 3060. I mean, you can see Cyberpunk and Fortnite. Those are big ray tracing games. They have a lot of complex ray tracing available. I don't know how much of it was enabled because like I don't have all the details for what settings were run. You know, Fortnite, you can crank up ray tracing really high to where it struggles on just about everything. Watch Dogs Legion, Hitman 3. Hitman 3 is an Intel promoted game, so, you know, grains of salt with the ray tracing. Guardians of the Galaxy, that's an NVIDIA title. You know, so there are games where it was worse. Battlefield 5, that's an interesting one because that's like one of the lighter ray tracing games. And they're saying, hey, Arc didn't do as well there. Maybe it just needs some better driver optimizations or whatever. So again, we'll see how this stacks up when I get the cards and actually test them over the next couple of weeks. But at least they're not avoiding comparisons like Cyberpunk ray tracing. XeSS, the answer to DLSS, kind of. Lots of the same functionality. You take, you know, your frame history, you take your motion vectors and the lower res frame, and you feed all of that into the machine learning XeSS algorithm, and it upscales it. And you know, you've got various modes. There's ultra quality, quality, balanced, and performance. Ultra quality, I'm not clear exactly what the upscaling factor is. I think the quality, balanced, and performance are similar to NVIDIA's upscaling factors, so 2x, 3x, 4x, whereas ultra quality is supposed to be more like DLAA, which is no upscaling but anti-aliasing and make it look as good as possible. This is just showing how like your render time gets really long at 4K, and so if you render at 1080p instead, you cut that way down, that first rendering and pre-effects block. Then you use XeSS to upscale and apply AA instead of TAA, and then the post effects still happen at the same rough time. This is just kind of a visualization, not necessarily an actual workload, is what they say. And this is what they're saying with XeSS. They're gaining up to 2x, 40% to 110%. That's on the A770 16 gigabytes, and that's using 1440p with performance mode, so you're doing 4x upsampling. So, you know, we'll see how that actually plays out. I actually tested Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but I could only test it on an A380. It didn't upscale very well at all. Quality looked fine, but performance was terrible. Like it gained 7%. So that was probably because of the underpowered GPU. Quick questions here. This may be worth it once their drivers mature. Yeah, I mean, we still don't know how bad the drivers are. It seems like they've gotten a lot better, even on the A380. So I'm hopeful. I'm still hopeful. I don't know that I'd rush out if you're a serious gamer and you play a lot of game, you know, 0-day game launches, but it's something to factor in. Anyone remember first-gen AMD ray tracing? How long did they take to reach relative competitive level with NVIDIA ray tracing? Answer, they're still not there, Slim Jim. They are not competitive with NVIDIA's ray tracing. And part of that goes back to the hardware. AMD does not have dedicated BVH traversal units, so that slows them down. All right, we've seen that already. They're promising better performance per dollar. It's exciting. Also, you'll get Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on Battle.net if you purchase a qualifying Intel Arc 7 graphics card when that game comes out on October 28th. That's not all you'll get, because they're saying you also get Gotham Knights, Ghostbusters, Spirits Unleashed, and The Settlers. I guess if you're excited about those games, that's great. You know, free games aren't bad, but you shouldn't consider this like, if you get 4 games, that is not like $160 value because that's not what Intel paid for them. They're probably paying dollars per game. And then this was the system configuration. I'm not going to read through all of that, but you can see here's game set 1. All these games are listed. They don't say exactly what settings are used on every game, because some of those games don't actually have like clear presets. Maybe these do, but I know some games don't. Like Grand Theft Auto doesn't, and Red Dead Redemption doesn't have a preset. That makes sense. Second set of games, a bunch more that they tested. Slightly different motherboard and solid state drive configuration. I don't know why. It says balanced power. Yeah, I guess that's fine. They're on a desktop, but I normally test at high power, the high performance power profile. And then their disclaimer slide. That's about it. I do need to get going. A couple of things. Any word on Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020? Haven't seen stats on that with DLSS 3. I didn't look. Maybe that wasn't in the benchmarks that they showed. DLSS 3 is coming. It's not out yet. DLSS for Flight Simulator isn't out yet. So, I still don't know how the frame doubling is going to make games feel, because that's one CPU rendered frame getting turned into 2 GPU frames. So your input doesn't get sampled twice as fast, but a lot of games just decouple input and stuff anyway. Yeah, I can't imagine Intel making money from this. They probably are, as the direct manufacturer of the cards, or more or less direct, volumes and stuff. They have a lot of deals in place, but it's probably like when you factor in R&D and everything else, yeah, I don't think they're making money, but they're getting started. And they want to gain market share, so I can't fault them for that, and I just hope they can stay in the game long enough to get drivers and hardware where they need to be. Matt says, they don't need to make big money. Yes, this is a slow burn initiative. I mean, the big question, Intel says all of their resources have now basically moved on to BattleMage. They're still working on drivers and things like that, but all their hardware guys are working on getting BattleMage ready. We don't know if BattleMage is going to be on TSMC's N5 or any of the other specs, but hopefully that comes out sooner than later. Like less than a year from now would be really good to see. Intel hasn't made any commitment on that. I asked them about that, and they're like, we're not going to make firm commitments. We've given a roadmap that says they're coming. It's sort of laid out a yearly cadence or every other year cadence, whatever. But they have not revealed any firm release date yet, and they're working on it. Has there been an update on Z390 platform? I got it to run on my Z390. I haven't tried the new cards on Z390 yet, obviously, but I did try A380 on it. I had some BIOS goofiness, but I think if they're working on getting their partners new vBIOSes, that should fix the issues I ran into. Intel did say if you've got a system that does not support resizable bar, I mean, the guy kind of joked, he's like, you should just go buy a 3060 then, because it will work okay. They're saying if you don't have a newer system built in the last 4 or 5 years that has resizable bar, you probably don't want an Arc GPU. They're trying to get motherboard vendors to turn on rebar. I'm more concerned investors say to Pat, cut any venture that isn't giving us profit. I'm concerned about that too. I bet the graphics people are also worried that could happen. But it hasn't happened, and I mean, GPUs are a big deal for data center. Like, they need a high density compute alternative to CPUs to compete with AMD and Intel, or AMD and Nvidia in the data center, in the supercomputer space. And so having Arc GPUs as an offshoot of that it's not as costly, maybe, if you want to think of it that way. So hopefully they get several iterations to try and make this work, and I hope they can make it work. And it takes years to fix driver issues. You know, AMD still has the black screen issue. I haven't seen that lately, but I mean, there's a lot of things that can cause it. Drivers are a forever problem. Like, you never get to say you're done making drivers, right? You have to keep updating them, making them better. Anyway, Arc at $289 for the A750. It sounds promising. I hope it works out well. I hope it performs well. And I hope Intel can get in the game and make some headway. I also hope that it just brings AMD and Nvidia prices down more, because, you know, that's what Nvidia needs, is someone to actually say, hey, you know, we've got some volume and we're going to bring prices down and compete with you. Will it succeed? That's the $20,000 pyramid question. I have to run, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a short one, relatively speaking, but got to go to Son's cross-country meet. Last one of the year. Tune in next time. We'll talk next week.